Good morning. I'm going to be reading chapters 26, 27, and 28. My difficult book made simple for George and Annie. Version 3, it began. What you need to know about black holes. Section 1. What is a black hole? Page 2. Section 2. How is a black hole made? Page 3. Section 3. How can you see a black hole? Page 4. Section 4. Falling into a black hole. Page 4. Section 5, Getting Out of a Black Hole, page 6. Section 1, What is a black hole? A black hole is a region where gravity is so strong that any light that tries to escape gets dragged back. Because nothing can travel faster than light, everything else will get dragged back too, so you can fall into a black hole and never get out again. A black hole has always been thought of as an ultimate prison from which there's no escape. Falling into a black hole is like falling over Niagara Falls. There's no way of getting back the same way you came. The edge of a black hole is called the horizon. It is like the edge of a waterfall. If you are above the edge, you can get away if you paddle fast enough. But once you pass the edge, you are doomed. As more things fall into a black hole, it gets bigger and the horizon moves farther out. It's like feeding a pig. The more you feed it, the larger it gets. Section 2. How is a black hole made? To make a black hole, you need to squash a very large amount of matter into a very small space. Then the pull of gravity will be so strong that light will be dragged back, unable to escape. One way black holes are formed is when stars have burned up their fuel. When stars that have burned up their fuel explode like giant hydrogen bombs, called supernovas. The explosion will drive off the outer layers of the star in a great expanding shell of gas, and it will push the central regions inward. If the star is more than a few times the size of our sun, a black hole will form. Much larger black holes are formed inside clusters in the center of galaxies. These regions will contain black holes and neutron stars as well as ordinary stars. Collisions between black holes and other objects will produce a growing black hole that swallows anything that comes near to it. Our own galaxy, the Milky Way, has at the center a black hole several million times the mass of our sun. Section 3. How can you see a black hole? The answer is you can't, because no light can get out of a black hole. It's like looking for a black cat in a black cellar, but you can detect a black hole by the way its gravity pulls on other things. We see stars that are orbiting something we can't see, but that we know can only be a black hole. We also see disks of gas and dust rotating around the central object that we can't see, but we know can only be a black hole. Section 4. Falling into a black hole. You can fall into a black hole just as you can fall into the sun. If you fall in feet first, your feet will be nearer to the black hole than your head and will be pulled harder by the gravity of the black hole, so you will be stretched out lengthwise and squashed in sideways. The stretching and squeezing is weaker the bigger the black hole is. If you fall into a black hole made by a star only a few times the size of our sun, you will be torn apart and made into spaghetti before you even reach the black hole. But if you fall into a much bigger black hole, you will pass the horizon, the edge of the black hole, and the point of no return, without noticing anything particular. However, someone watching you fall in from a distance will never see you cross the horizon because gravity warps time and space near a black hole. To them, you will appear to slow down as you approach the horizon and get dimmer and dimmer. You get dimmer because the light you send out takes longer and longer to get away from the black hole. If you cross the horizon at 11 o'clock according to your wristwatch, someone looking at you would see the watch slow down and never quite reach 11 o'clock. Section 5. Getting out of a black hole. People used to think nothing could ever get out of a black hole. After all, that's why they were called black holes. Anything that fell into a black hole was thought to be lost and gone forever. Black holes would last until the end of time. They were eternal prisons from which there was no hope of escape. But then it was discovered that this picture wasn't quite right. Tiny fluctuations in space and time meant that black holes couldn't be the perfect traps they were once thought. Instead, They would slowly leak particles in from the Hawking radiation. The rate of leakage is slower the bigger the black hole is. The Hawking radiation would cause black holes to gradually evaporate. The rate of evaporation would be very slow at first, but it will speed up the black hole as the black hole gets smaller. Eventually, after billions and billions of years, the black hole will disappear. So, black holes aren't eternal prisons after all. But what about their prisoners? The things that made the black hole or that fell in later. They will be recycled into energy and particles. But if you examine what comes out of the black hole very carefully, you can reconstruct what was inside. So the memory of what falls into a black hole is not lost forever, just for a very long time. You can get out of a black hole. Chapter 27. The next day was the day of the big science competition at school. George left home early. He said goodbye to his pig, kissed his mother, put Eric's book on black holes into his bag, and scooted out of the door, breakfast in hand. His dad offered to take him to school on the back of his bicycle made for two, but George just yelled, "No thanks, Dad," and was gone, leaving his parents feeling like small tornado had just swept through the house. George ran up the road, and when he got to the main intersection, he looked back to see if either of his parents was waving at him from the front door. When he saw that they weren't, he turned left at the corner instead of right, the direction he would have taken to go to school. He knew he didn't have much time, so he hurried along as fast as he could. As he ran, thoughts streamed through his head. He thought about Eric, who by now would be swallowed up by the great dark menace of the black hole, the strongest force in the universe. He thought about Cosmos and whether George would find him in the place where he was headed. He thought about Annie, whom he would see later at the competition. Would she believe him when he told her about her dad had been tricked by an evil former colleague into taking a journey across outer space that had plunged him into great danger? Now, George understood why Annie told such extraordinary stories. After the wonders of the universe, real life did seem pretty dull. He couldn't imagine the life without Annie or Cosmos or Eric now, or at least he could, but he didn't want to. He had to save Eric. He had to. George didn't know and couldn't imagine why Dr. Reaper wanted to throw Eric into a black hole and steal his amazing computer. But he could guess that whatever Dr. Reaper was up to, it wasn't for the good of mankind, science, Eric, or anyone else. Whatever Dr. Reaper's aim was, George felt sure it was a horrible one. The other thing that went through George's head as he ran on toward Dr. Reaper's house was the science competition later that day. If he won the competition by giving a great talk about the solar system, even his dad wouldn't be able to say no to George having the computer in the house. The problem was that the awesome plan George had cooked up to save Eric from being eaten by a black hole meant he wouldn't actually be at the competition, so he had no hope of winning. It wasn't easy for George to give up the idea of entering, but he knew he had no choice if he wanted to get Eric back. There was no other way to do it. George reached 42 Forest Way and took a few moments to get his breath back. As he panted quietly, he looked at the house in front of him. The driveway led through some dilapidated gates to a huge old building with weird-looking turrets sticking out of the roof. George crept up in the driveway to the house and stared in through the large window. Through the grimy glass, he saw a room full of furniture covered in yellowing sheets and cobwebs hanging from the ceiling. Picking his way through a bed of nettles, he tiptoed to the next set of windows. One of the windows was slightly open at the bottom. Looking in, George saw a familiar sight. In the middle of the crazed mess of pipes, cables, and narrow glass tubes holding brightly colored bubbling liquids was Dr. Reaper, with his back to him, standing in front of a computer screen that was glowing with green light. Even from behind, George could tell that Dr. Reaper was not at all happy. He watched as his teacher struck the computer keyboard wildly, using all of his fingers at once, as though he was playing a very difficult piano solo. The window was open just enough for George to hear what he was saying. "See?" Dr. Reaper yelled at the computer screen. "I can keep doing this all day. Eventually I'll find the secret key. If you just see if I don't. And when I do, you'll have to let me into the universe. You'll have to." "Negative," replied Cosmos. "You have entered an incorrect command. I cannot process your request." Dr. Reaper tried some different keys. "Error," said Cosmos. "Error type 293. Grr, replied Dr. Reaper. I will crack you, Cosmos, I will. At that moment, his phone rang. He snatched it up. Yes, he barked into the receiver. Ah, he went on in a more polite voice. Hello, you got my message? He coughed in a very fake way. I'm not feeling so good today. No, just a bad cold. I think I'll have to take the day off. Such a shame about the competition. He coughed a few more times. Sorry, have to run. I'm feeling pretty foggy. Bye. He slammed the phone down and turned back to Cosmos. See, little computer, he said, rubbing his hands. Now I have all day. I do not operate for anyone who is not a member of the Order, replied Cosmos, sounding very brave. Ha 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 ha. Dr. Reaper laughed crazily. So the old order still exists, does it? Those silly busybodies who think they can save the planet and humanity? The fools who he went on, they should save themselves while there's still time. That's what I intend to do. Forget humanity. Humans don't deserve to be saved. He spat on the floor. Look at what they've done so far to this beautiful planet. I'm going to start again somewhere else with a new life form. Those silly little boys think that I'll be taking them with me, but I won't. I'll leave them here to die, just like the rest of the human race. I'll be the only one left in the universe, me and my new life form, which will obey my every word. All I need is to get out there into outer space. You, Cosmos, are going to help me. Negative, replied Cosmos. I refuse to operate for a non-member of the Order. I was a member once, claimed Dr. Reaper. Your membership was canceled, replied Cosmos firmly, after you. Yes, said Dr. Reaper quickly. Let's not talk about that. Don't bring up bad memories now, Cosmos. Surely it's time to forgive and forget, he spoke in a horrible, syrupy voice. Negative, said Cosmos, causing Dr. Reaper to rise up in a fury in front of the computer and bring his hands crashing down once more onto the keyboard. Ouch, said Cosmos, a few bright sparks flying out from the keyboard. George couldn't bear to watch any longer. As much as he wanted to break in and stop Dr. Reaper from hurting poor Cosmos any more, he knew it was vital to get him out of the house and away from the great computer as quickly as possible. To do that, George needed to get to school. He ran back until he reached the school gates. Big buses sat in the road outside, hordes of children wearing different colored school uniforms climbing out of them. These were the other kids from nearby schools arriving to take part in the science competition. George weaved through the crowd, saying, excuse me, sorry. He was searching for someone. George! He heard his name and looked around, but couldn't see who was shouting at him. Then he spotted her, a tiny figure in a dark blue uniform, jumping up and down and waving at him. He scrambled over to her as quickly as he could. Annie, he said when he reached her, I'm so glad to see you. Come on, we haven't got a minute to spare. What's up, said Annie, wrinkling her nose. Is something wrong with your talk? Is that your boyfriend? A much older boy in the same school uniform as Annie interrupted. Oh, go away, Annie snapped at the bigger boy. And say stupid things to someone else. George held his breath in fear, waiting to see what the bigger boy would do. But he just turned away meekly and got lost in the crowd. Where have you been? George asked Annie. I told you, replied Annie. At Granny's house. Mom dropped me back at the school, so I haven't even been home yet. What's wrong, George? What is it? Annie, said George, very seriously, I've got something awful to tell you, but he didn't get the chance. A teacher blew a whistle very loudly, forcing everyone to be quiet. Okay, everybody, the teacher announced, I want you all to line up in your school groups, ready to go into the Great Hall, where the science competition will begin. You, he pointed at George in his dark green uniform among a crowd of kids in blue, are with the wrong school. Kindly go find your own group before you confuse people anymore. Meet me just outside the hall, George hissed to Annie. It's really important, Annie. I need your help. With that, he left her and joined his own school group. He started walking toward the hall, looking now for someone, or rather several someones else. When he saw them, Ringo and his group of friends hovering in the hallway, George knew what he had to do. He grabbed the nearest teacher and started speaking in a very loud voice. Sir, he yelled, sir. What is it, George? Said the teacher, backing off a little at the unexpected volume. Sir, shouted George again, making sure everyone around had stopped what they were doing and was listening to him. I need to change the topic of my talk. I'm not sure that's possible, said the teacher. And do you mind not shouting? But I have to, bellowed George. I've got a new title. What's the title, said the teacher, who was now worried that the boy had gone a little crazy. It's Cosmos, the world's most amazing computer, and how he works. I see, said the teacher, thinking George was definitely insane. I'll ask the judging panel what they think. Oh, good, thank you, sir. George yelled even louder than before. Did you catch the whole title? It's Cosmos, the world's most amazing computer, and how he works. Thank you, George, said the teacher quietly. I'll do my best for you. As he walked off, sighing deeply to himself, George noticed that Ringo had taken out his cell phone and was making a call. All he could do now was wait. George stood by the entrance to the hall, watching the long lines of school children file in past them. He didn't have to wait long before, out of breath and trembling with excitement, Dr. Reaper rushed up to him. George, he exclaimed, smoothing his hair down with one scaly hand. Did you manage to change the topic of your talk, that is? I think so, George told him. I'll check for you, said Dr. Reaper. Don't worry. You go ahead and give the talk on Cosmos and how he works, and I'll just make sure it's okay with the judging panel. Good idea for a talk, George. Brilliant. Just then, the principal came by. Dr. Reaper, he said curiously, I heard you were ill today. I'm feeling much better, stated Dr. Reaper firmly, and very much looking forward to the competition. That's the spirit, said the principal. I'm so glad you're here, Reaper. One of the judges has had to drop out, so you're just the man to take his place. Oh, no, said Dr. Reaper hurriedly. I'm sure you can find someone much better. Nonsense, said the principal. You're just the ticket. Come along, Reaper. You can sit with me. Grimacing, Reaper had no choice but to follow the principal and take the seat next to him at the front of the hall. George waited by the door until at last he saw Annie again, coming toward him in a great gaggle of kids in blue uniforms. As she walked past him, he grabbed her sleeve and pulled her out of the great river of children flowing into the hall. We've got to go, he whispered to her in her ear. Now! Where? Asked Annie. Where do we have to go? Your dad's fallen into a black hole, said George. Follow me. We have to rescue him. Chapter 28. Annie hurried along the hallway after George. But George, she said, where are we going? Shush, he said over his shoulder. This way. He was taking Annie toward the side door which led out onto the road. It was strictly forbidden for pupils to go out that door by themselves during school hours. If George and Annie were caught leaving the school without permission, they would get in deep trouble. Worse, much worse, they would forfeit their only chance to reach Cosmos, which would mean that Eric would be lost inside a black hole forever. It was vital that they leave the school as fast as possible. They walked along stiffly, trying to look completely natural and innocent, as though they had every reason in the world to be going in the opposite direction from everyone else. It seemed to be working. No one paid any attention to them. They were just approaching the side door when George saw a teacher walking toward them. He crossed his fingers, hoping they wouldn't be spotted, but it didn't work. George, said the teacher, and where might you be going? Oh, sir, said George, we are just, he faltered and ran out of steam. I left something for the science presentation in my coat pocket, sir, Annie cleared her voice, cut in. So my teacher asked this boy to show me the way back to the coat rooms. Carry on, then, said the teacher, letting them pass, but he stood watching them until they disappeared into the coat rooms. When they peered back into the hallway, he was still standing there guarding the school exit. The last children were straggling into the science presentation, which was due to start any minute now. Rats, said George, retreating back to the coat room. We won't get out through that door. They looked around. In the wall above the row of coat pegs was a long, thin, rectangular window. Do you think you can squeeze through? George asked Annie. It's the only way out, isn't it? She said, looking up at the window. George nodded grimly. Then I'll just have to, said Annie with a great determination. I'm not letting a black hole eat my dad. I'm not. George could tell by the way she was scrunched up her face that she was trying not to cry. He wondered if he'd done the right thing in telling her. Maybe he should have tried to rescue Eric all by himself. But it was too late for all kinds of thoughts. He had Annie with him now, and they needed to get on with it. Come on, he said briskly. I'll give you a leg up. He hoisted her so she could undo the catch. push the window open and slither through the narrow gaps. She gave a small squeak as she vanished from view. George pulled himself up onto the ledge and tried to slide through as Annie had done, but he was a lot bigger than her and it wasn't easy. He got halfway through but then couldn't go any farther. He was stuck. One side of him dangling out the window over the street outside his school, the other side still in the coat room. "George!" Annie reached up and grabbed his foot. "Don't pull," he said, gently easing himself through the gap, sucking in his breath as much as he could. With another wriggle, he pulled himself free of the tight frame and landed on a crumpled heap of pavement. He staggered to his feet and grabbed Annie's hand. "Run," he panted. "We've got to get out of sight." They sped around the corner and stopped so that George could catch his breath. "Annie," he started to say, but she waved at him to be quiet. She got her cell phone and was making a call. "Mom," she said urgently into the phone. "It's an emergency. No, I'm fine. It's not me. Yes, I'm at the school where you dropped me this morning, but I've got to—" "No, Mom, I haven't done anything. Mom, listen, please. Something's happened to Dad, something awful, and we've got to rescue him. He's gone into outer space and got lost. We have to get him back. Can you come pick us up? I'm with my friend George, and we're just near his school. Quickly, Mom, quickly, hurry. We haven't got long. Okay, bye." "What did your mom say?" asked George. "She said, 'When will your father learn to stop doing silly things and behave like an adult?'" "What does she mean by that?" said George, perplexed. "I don't know," said Annie. "Grown-ups have funny ideas." "Is she coming?" "Yes, she won't be long. She's coming in her Mini." Sure enough, a few minutes later, the little red car with white stripes pulled up next to them. A sweet-faced lady with long brown hair wound down the window and stuck out her head. "Well, whatever next," she said cheerfully. "Your father and his adventures. I don't know. What are you two doing out of school?" "George, this is my mom." "Mom, this is George," said Annie, ignoring her mother's question and wrenching open the passenger's door. She held the front seat forward so George could climb in. "You can go in the back," she told him, "but be careful, don't break anything." The back seat was covered in recorders, cymbals, triangles, mini harps, and string drums. "Sorry, George," said Annie's mom as he clambered in. "I'm a music teacher. That's why I have so many instruments." "A music teacher?" echoed George in surprise. "Yes," said Annie's mom. "What did Annie tell you I was? President of the United States?" "No," said George, catching her eye in the rearview mirror. "She said you were a dancer in Moscow." "That's enough talk about me, as though I wasn't here," said Annie, putting on her seatbelt. "Mom, drive the car. We need to rescue Dad. It's really important." Annie's mom just sat there with the engine off. "Don't panic, Annie," she said mildly. "Your father's been in all sorts of difficult situations before. I'm sure he's going to be fine. After all, Cosmos wouldn't let anything terrible happen to him. I think you two should just go back to school and we won't say any more about it." That's the thing," said George, who wasn't quite sure what to call Annie's mom. "Eric hasn't got Cosmos. He's been stolen. Eric's in outer space all by himself and he's near a black hole." "By himself?" repeated Annie's mom. She suddenly turned quite pale. "No Cosmos? But then he can't get back. In a black hole?" "Mom, I kept telling you it's an emergency," pleaded Annie. "Now, do you believe me?" "Oh my goodness gracious me! Fasten your seatbelt, George," exclaimed Annie's mom, starting the car, "and tell me where I need to go." George gave her Dr. Reaper's address, and she put her foot down on the accelerator so hard that the little car shot forward with such great lurch. As the red Mini zoomed through the hefty traffic towards Reaper's house, George explained as best he could what happened over the past 24 hours. While the little car wove through the traffic across town, cutting in and out, much to the annoyance of people in bigger cars, he told Annie and her mom, who asked him to call her Susan, all about going to see Eric yesterday to ask for help with the science presentation. He told them that the mysterious note he hadn't trusted about Eric leaping through the portal and into space and having to follow him, and how both of them had gotten sucked toward the invisible force, and how when the doorway appeared to save them, it was too faintly and only George had managed to get through. He told them about landing in the library and looking around to find that Eric wasn't there, and how Cosmos had been stolen, how George had run after the thieves but had lost them in the dark, and how he had gone back to Eric's to look for the book that Eric had told him to find, and how he tried to read it but couldn't understand it, and when he found the notes in the back that explained it, it was possible to escape from a black hole. how he needed to find Cosmos because although someone could escape from a black hole, he would need Cosmos to make it happen, and how he'd realized where Cosmos must be and had gone there that morning and seen Dr. Reaper. Reaper? You mean Graham Reaper? Susan interrupted him as she swerved a little car around a corner. Yes, replied George. Reaper, he's my teacher. Do you know him? I did once. A long time ago, said Susan in a dark voice. I always told Eric that he shouldn't trust Graham, but he wouldn't listen. Eric always thought of the best people until, she trailed off. Until what? Piped up Annie. Until what, Mom? Until something terrible happened, said Susan, her mouth set in a grim line. Something none of us have ever forgotten. None of who? Said Annie, gasping with excitement at the prospect of a thrilling family story she hadn't heard before. But she didn't get to find out because right then her mom turned into Reaper's driveway and parked the car in front of his house.